I'm here with Rhiannon Tui.
And I'm here with Maury Boise Barlin, and today we're talking with Angela Burton, who describes herself as a writer and chief writing motivator of Feet for the Fire Writers Workshop. She is an absolute pistol, and thank you so much for joining us today, Angela. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I shouldn't have said that I'm a pistol, but I might be.
Just don't go off during the interview.
No, I won't.
So, Angela, I've been an avid fan of your work with Feet to the Fire. And when I first saw that, I wondered what the hell it was and what you've started. So you're a writer
Yes.
and
Yes.
you've taken your writing into the creative space of elder care. Before you tell me why you've gone into the elder care, I want to know, what is Feet to the Fire and how did it start?
I started it as a passion project about 10 years ago. And I literally was kind of selfish in the way that I started it. I just wanted to be around people that wanted to write like me, like wanted to gather together. And so my kids thought I was absolutely crazy. I invited 8 strangers into my living room that came once a week for about 8 weeks. And then we'd end that group and then I'd start another one and another one and literally complete strangers. But what I found was people wanted to be in community and they wanted to share parts of their lives. And I was the prompt and the guide. I was the fire starter, if you will. And the first night that I actually hosted the group, it was October, and I built a fire in my fireplace because stories have for eons been told around the fire. And it made sense to call it Feet to the Fire Writers Workshops. And so that went for several months. My whole background is writing. I have an MFA in writing, and I write fiction and nonfiction, poetry. My dad, before he died, wrote a lot. He wrote down many of his stories unprompted. I didn't even know he was doing it. He would email them to us,
Wow.
print them out. And my mom, who's about to turn 94, was also instrumental in encouraging me to take what I'd started and try to push it forward. And she said, "Why don't you work with people like me?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she was in her 80s at the time. And she said, "You know, old people." And I said, "You're not old." And she said, "No, seriously, your dad got a lot out of writing. I think you might be onto something." And then that's when I started to go seek out like a retirement community to just pilot the program. I didn't even know what I was doing. I knew how to teach. I knew how to lead people. I knew how much I loved writing. And I just kind of took it all. And I thought, I have no idea if this is going to work. And I actually convinced a retirement community to not only let me come in and do it, but to pay me to do it. But it meant something. I knew that if people pay for something, it matters and they will show up. That I knew that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
psychological. You know, things that are free, you don't value as much.
That's true. That's really true. And that's something that I see a lot, a lot of creatives coming into aged care who aren't paid, who volunteer their time, and that just continues forever. And that's really tricky.
Your heart's in it and you want to give, but you also don't want to just give it up for free. But that's how it began. And I went into this very first group and I think the oldest person in that group was 94, 96 at the time. And the youngest one was, I don't know, maybe in their 70s and like a young whippersnapper. And and they kind of helped me because I knew what to do. I knew what I had in my mind, my vision, and they came right to the table and they just did it. Every single week they'd bring their stories in and they would willingly share and magic happened. I knew when it was happening that it was working. And then I kept doing it. I did it for like almost 2 years, just running all over Louisville, Kentucky, doing the same thing. Everybody that would let me in the door, open the door, everybody that would let me in the door to do a writing workshop with their residents, I would go do the workshop. And as I was doing it, I was learning more and more and more about the process myself, and I was learning about the outcomes that would happen for the group.
So with a session, like how does it work? Like what is contained in a session? But more importantly, what sort of outcomes, what are the expected outcomes for people participating in your fires?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's a very structured journaling program and it's expressive writing. So, you know, nobody has to write about their childhood. They can write about last week if they want to. But through a series of quirky prompts and very particular organized, groups every week, and they're small groups. People can gather together. They actually do the writing outside of the time. They don't do it on the spot because that is very hard. Even for seasoned writers, that's hard to do on the spot. And they can think about it, and they can like recollect and reminisce inside, and then they can bring it back to their group. And so initially, what happens is they might be in a group of people that they don't really know each other, but over time, they start to do this. And it's beautiful. So what happens is, of course, they write their stories. That's the cream that comes to the top. But also what happens is this incredible social connection, this fabric of friendship. And that was the most wonderful thing about Feet to the Fire for me, to watch that happen, to watch people find each other. Because a lot of times people that live in care communities, their families are far flung, they're, in other parts of the country, and they literally need friends. And so this is a very guided group that allows them to be creative. They write funny stories and heartbreaking stories, and there's tears and there's laughter and there's communion. And I think that's what makes it so special.
Community
Yep.
is so important, and I think that having those strong connections can really increase quality of life and give people purpose and meaning. I noticed you mentioned some fun prompts. Would you mind sharing some of them?
It might be a prompt like what you wouldn't say. And then automatically you're going to say it, whatever it is. One of the prompts that always got people going was the word porches. Things happen on porches. First
Yeah.
kisses happen on porches. People fall off porches. They're called stoops. They're called verandas. They're all these words. Sometimes it's just a word that causes people to remember what you felt sorry for. The prompts are literally not your particular prompts. They're not like talk about when you were in first grade. It's like, no, 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 no. Talk about the time you fell down and skinned your knee.
Yeah.
That first time. Firsts are a big one. Lots of firsts. We have writers' kits. During the pandemic, when everything got wacko, our program was already running in some care communities. And then I thought, well, at first they shut everybody out. And I thought, well, at least they have Feet to the Fire. They'll be okay. But then they shut everybody into their rooms. My heart sank because I thought this program can't run like that. But out of that, I wound up creating individual writers kits. Within those kits, there's like a little ring with over 200 prompts, and everybody can just work on their prompts at will and bring them back to the group. And they're pretty nice.
Sometimes when we ask people, particularly that are living with cognitive decline, we talk to them about, would you like to go to the men's group? Would you like to talk about tractors? And I always say that it's important to go with the tangible. Like if you're going to talk about a spanner, hand a person a spanner, and then they will feel the weight of it. They feel the cold steel. They look at the size of it. And so it's a tangible prompt. Oh, look at that.
Wow.
This actually is an old plumb line thing.
Yeah.
I actually would use this. I would take it in and I would put it in people's hands, and sometimes it's tactile. So objects, absolutely. Tangible things. When I was first kind of testing this out, I would go to antique stores and I would find relics from the past. I literally spent $50 on a ration book because I wanted to take it in to my group and say, here, remember this? And oh man, did it open up a lot of minds. They literally wrote tons of stories around just that one object.
Do you think that as creatives that we bring things that are more tangible, more tactile to the table, and that's what the power is in our work?
I do. I do. And I think that we're also, as creatives, we're willing to be playful and organic. And we're willing to kind of let things unfold instead of trying to control like the outcomes. That's what I learned most in any of this work
Wow.
is that I would have an idea, right, of how I thought it should go. And then somebody in the group or multiple people in the group would take it in a bunch of different ways. And I would just say, okay, and be willing and just be willing to keep letting it happen, because I always say that the individuals in Feet to the Fire, they do all the legwork, they do all the hard work, they do all the writing. Feet to the Fire just holds space for them. I know that in talking to other care communities in the United States, they would say, "Oh, we tried journaling, it didn't work." And I'm like, "Well, there's a reason it doesn't work. If you just hand people an empty journal and you say, 'Go have fun,' it's not the same. Like, you really do have to have some structure to it. Yet you have to have open-endedness to it. So as a creative, absolutely be open to the possibilities. I'd say that always.
Yeah.
How do you work with people who do have like a cognitive disability, or maybe, they have arthritis, they're not able to like physically write? What are your creative solutions around working with people who have disabilities?
We have worked with people and still work with people who have had Parkinson's disease, dementia, traumatic brain injury. We've worked with people with intellectual disabilities, a spectrum, right? And that presents a bunch of different barriers sometimes. So sometimes people have had stroke, they have trouble actually speaking. A lot of times with Parkinson's, the handwriting gets very tiny, like
Mm.
almost impossible to read. Or maybe they've got hearing issues, and so we've had to use headphones or be really mindful of the type of room that they're in. But sometimes, if people can't physically write, we will do something where there is a volunteer scribe who can work with the person one on one in
Oh,
between
yeah.
the sessions. And so they can together write the story down. In working with people that have dementia, and I would say early to mid stage, it's so interesting how much the long term memory hangs in there. People might come to the program and they have their story and they've written it down and they laugh and they say it's like it wrote itself. And then they go to leave the room and they can't remember whether to turn left or right to go back to their place. It's fascinating to me how they're able to write a story, but the short-term memory is not there. But it's still so valuable because I've watched people with dementia come into a room sort of flustered because it took them a minute to get there. And they look a little just kind of like bewildered. And then they sit down and they start remembering because they're hearing the stories and they're connecting through other people's stories as they read them. And then it's their turn to read and they can contribute. And that there's something meaningful in that contribution.
Mm.
And it's also very meaningful because you're right, it gives them a purpose. They feel very seen and heard. And that is tremendous.
If you were to train people or for your guides, what are the two most important qualities you
They
think?
need to have curiosity. Curiosity has to drive the boat.
I think curiosity for me is the most important ingredient for what I do because from curiosity flows authenticity.
And they need to have a sense of patience and a sense of humor for sure. And the need not to control the group. You could get in teacher mode if you're not careful, but you don't want to be. You want to just be there to hold the space and keep things moving, but you want to also sit back, right? And allow people to come to life. And it's not that we're having teachers do this, we're actually having people help others come to the table and come to the circle. So when somebody actually becomes a facilitator in the care community, they become a guide. And we teach them how to do that and the pitfalls and the don't do's, but they actually get the benefits out of it as a caregiver. In the US, there's such turnover in caregiving. It's almost like you want something for your staff that will be meaningful to them, that makes their job happy every day when they go, right? And if they can have programs that are rich and meaningful and purpose driven, it makes their jobs easier and it makes their jobs more fulfilling. So that's one aspect. I think when somebody becomes a facilitator, we pick the right people and I ask them to pick the right people, pick your creatives, pick your fun people that really want to try this. The participants get a lot out of it, but so do the guides.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's enabling. That's a great model.
the best kind of enabling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's face it, and I think, I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that it can be a cold and rigid system. People often say working in aged care, it can be pretty tough. And we know that there are lots of challenges, and God bless their nylon socks for those that do work in there day in, day out. The license to play, as my old CEO used to say, is really important.
I was also wondering, does this creative work influence what information you might pass over or what the care team might pass over to leadership or the clinical side of care as well?
Anytime it's possible, I ask that it be studied, if you will. So, for example, we did a wonderful pilot with CABI, the Center for Aging, Brain Health and Innovation in Ontario. We had to do it on Zoom, which made it even weirder, right? Because part of the magic of this is in person, but it works beautifully on Zoom, turns out. And you can actually get to know people over the course of weeks on Zoom calls. What we wanted to find out was, how would this impact people's social connectedness and their feelings of belonging in the world? In those groups that we did, these were people who did not live in care homes. A lot of them lived independently at home, aging in place, but they were all Zooming in for these calls every week. And we did it over like 12 weeks. Then we studied with some very specific, like self-reporting questions. And we found some interesting outcomes. Their social connectivity increased by like 23% over the course of 12 weeks. They felt belonging. And I was amazed. That blew me away. When you can put it in a clinical setting and you can actually study it as a biostatistician would, to understand the evidence based behind this, there is a ton of evidence based information behind writing and expressive writing. It helps people who have depression and anxiety, for example. It helps people feel like they can get their thoughts and feelings out, they can process. When you do it in a group, in a community, you're not alone. And so the loneliness decreases too, because you're sharing with other people. We've also done this in some nonprofit settings where we did a pilot with an organization called Gilda's Club. So it's for people with active cancer and cancer survivors, families, caregivers who had lost their people to cancer. And again, what we found was people need each other. And writing helps people connect. Stories are what connect us. One of my groups that I ran for years was a Monday morning group. Monday mornings are bad. You know, who likes Mondays? I could walk into that group and I might be a little grumpy or whatever, but I'd snap myself in, you know, because you have to put your face on. But it only took seconds. They were my friends. We became attached, and attachment is tremendous. We're so unattached in society because of technology, and people think that's like the
Yeah.
end all be all, but it's often driving us apart. And so I feel really strongly about this. If we can attach, boy, things feel a lot better in the world.
Angela, you were talking about attachment, which leads me to think, is there a length of the program?
Initially, okay, when people come into the program, you know, we tell them it'll run 8 weeks or so, and then, you know, if they like it, they can keep going. And then they keep going. It can go on forever. I mean, people will continue to write story after story after story. I've seen people have multiple journals filled with stories. It's pretty incredible. Because think about it, you never really run out of stories. There's always things happening, and there's always things that have happened. And sometimes when people remember, they remember things they thought that they had forgotten.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool when it comes to people with memory loss.
Is there any stories that have personally affected you in any kind of way, like inspired you emotionally, taught you lessons maybe? Is there any like things that you could share, stories that have touched you?
There's so many people that I've met through this program, and they're all so incredibly unique. One particular person stands out in my mind, and he came from memory care, and somebody had to walk him over to our group because he was in like a locked memory care unit. And he said, you know, can I write fiction? And I said, you can write fiction if you want. You can write whatever. He sat in that first day, and then he went away. And I thought he may or may not come back. Like, I don't know. I didn't know this person, you know. And it turns out he he was one of the most phenomenal writers I've ever met. And he had diagnosed Alzheimer's disease. He was incredible in how he would take the prompts and he would turn them completely inside out. And he would write this fascinating story. One of his stories is on the podcast. Incredible writer, just incredible. There was a gentleman in the program in one of my groups. He had joined the group after his wife had died. So he was grieving. He'd been married for a good number of years. And he stayed in the program for several years, up until a week before he died. I mean, he came with oxygen, and he knocked on the door. Can I still come? I mean, he was there up until the end of his life. He was so proud of the work he'd done. It was pretty meaningful.
I have
Wow.
no words. That's just, oh my God, the goosebumps.
Goosebumps stuff like that happens in it all the time.
I kind of feel like, as creatives, we just spend our days with, with goosebumps at what we see and experience. And
How does this influence families and care partners of people that are participating in this program?
For me, when I had my dad's stories after my dad died, I had a piece of him. I have a piece of him, lots of pieces. And when that gentleman passed away, he didn't tell his family that he was writing the stories. He would come every week, and he proceeded to write every single week. And he would stuff the stories in his drawer in his room. He didn't tell anybody. And then when they literally were cleaning out his room, there they were, and they read them and they found them. And so that family in particular was just completely taken by the fact that their dad had bothered to put it all down. Like stories like when he proposed to their mother, they had never, like the day, exactly what happened. These are not stories that people will necessarily just tell you if you're talking to them. That's the other thing about, maybe it goes along with the myth of this is storytelling. It's not, it's writing. Very different.
How do you feel that your work has opened the doors?
I think it opens the doors to people's souls. I really do actually mean that, because what I see in people when they engage in this program and they actually ask of themselves, to do this, to write these things down, they just open up, they bloom. It opens their mind, it opens their heart, it opens their eyes to each other. So I guess in that respect, it absolutely opens the doors for the human being.
is there a big picture dream that you have for aged care?
I hope that aged care gets the idea to include all kinds of creative programs, is what I hope. And there's so many good programs out there. Feet to the Fire is just one of many. But I really hope that, the aged care industry, as it were, wraps its arms around the fact that we are not robots. We are not technology bobbleheads. We are human beings, and we need to have art, music, plants, harmonicas, pets, dogs, cats. We need each other, and we need as much openness to create as we can have.
Thank you so much, Angela Burton, for your time today in and sharing your beautiful creative approach. It is so good that we have people like you working in this field creatively and bringing heart and care. Thank you.
Thank you so much for asking me. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you, Angela.
Okay, bye-bye.
And before we go, if you work in the creative aging space and would like to share your work with us globally, please get in contact with us at otd@communityhomeaustralia.org.
Over and out.